Hi everybody, welcome to Christian Homestead. My name is Jared. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe. A little while ago, we were looking at this discourse by President Brigham Young, and the occasion was the laying of the cornerstones for the Salt Lake Temple, and he issued a really interesting prophecy about future temples. But there's a part of this that I think I got wrong, so I want to correct this. I realized that after reading some of the comments. And then there was another comment that pointed me to a very interesting talk that has to do with this prophecy. It was a talk by President Gordon B. Hinckley, and the potential fulfillment or partial fulfillment of this prophecy. And then that led me to something else by Elder James E. Talmage, who possibly saw the same thing in vision, or he prophesied about it. I'm not entirely clear. But yeah, we have to revisit this. Okay, so let me just read the yellow part just to get you caught up. Maybe you forgot about it. Maybe you didn't see that video. Okay, so Brigham Young says, 5 years ago, last July, so that was back in 1847 when he first came to the Salt Lake Valley, I was here and saw in the spirit the temple not 10 feet from where we have laid the chief cornerstone. I have not inquired what kind of temple we should build. Why? Because it was represented before me. I have never looked upon that ground, but the vision of it was there. I see it as plainly as if it was in reality before me. Wait until it is done. I will say, however, that it will have 6 towers to begin with instead of 1. Okay. So I left all the highlights the same as when I made that video. And at the time, you could read this a couple ways, but the way that I read it, I think was wrong. I was thinking that he was saying it's going to start with 6 towers, but in the future, there's going to be more. Some people pointed out he was probably just saying, it's like if you were saying, okay, so here we have this new temple, and to start out with, compared to other like the Nauvoo or Kirtland Temple, to start out with, it's going to have 6 spires instead of just the one on the Kirtland Temple or the Nauvoo Temple. So I'm going to have to go with that because it makes more sense. So I apologize for the confusion. I'm not a perfect person, believe it or not. I do make mistakes from time to time, but I'm happy to admit that whenever I come across a mistake. I'm only concerned with the truth. So I think that's what he's saying. Continuing, he says, now, do not any of you apostatize because it will have 6 towers, and Joseph only built 1. It is easier for us to build 16 than it was for him to build 1. Now, here's like the prophecy that we're going to be talking about in this video. He says, the time will come when there will be 1 in the center of temples we shall build, and on the top, groves and fish ponds. But we shall not see them here at present. Okay, so there's a couple things. First, he says that there will be 1, like I guess 1 spire, 1 tower in the center of temples. And we do have a lot of temples like that. For example, my temple, if I had stayed in Kansas, would have been the Wichita Kansas Temple. And I do plan on visiting that temple and going through it. It's still under construction. But this is part of this series of prefab temples. And they all pretty much have the same layout, it seems like, where they have this central spire. But even before this point, you have many temples that just have 1. One that comes to mind immediately is the Jordan River Temple. That's the first temple I ever went to do baptisms for the dead when I was 12 years old, along with many others. So it's kind of interesting to think that maybe Brigham Young was seeing all these temples of the future that would just have a central spire. So there's that part. And then the other part, he talks about groves and fish ponds on top of the temple, or on top of, I guess, future temples. Okay, so in the comments, a a lot of people were pointing out temples that have atriums. For example, Anita Pulsifer and Marianne said that the Las Vegas, Nevada temple has an atrium, which I remember. I went there just once, but I remember that atrium. It's very beautiful. I got this comment from Win Advertising saying that the Portland temple has an atrium. And I guess I'll point out, here I am back when I weighed 500 pounds less than I do now, back in 2006. Jenica and I got married and sealed in the Bountiful, Utah temple. And on the lower level, like an underground level, it has this really pretty atrium. Here's another picture where you can see it a little bit better. I knew that these two pictures would be useful at some point in the future. Out of the million poses and locations on temple grounds that we took pictures, I knew that they had to be useful at some point. And so here it is. And then also, I got these two comments, one from Susie Ames and the other one from Diane, pointing out that the Oakland, California temple has a garden, and then that the San Diego temple has an atrium. And I looked that up. There's this website. I'm not sure what this is. This is like a private website. It's not a church website, called templehill.org. Temple Hill's Hidden Roof Gardens. And it looks like, based on what it says, that this is on top of the Oakland, California temple. Let me know if you've been there before. I really like that. I went to Google Maps, and here's the Oakland, California temple, and I'm assuming it's these like gardens that are up here. I don't know where the main entrance is. It doesn't look like it's right there, so you must go through down here, and this is kind of like a rooftop, so to speak. If you know more, let me know all about it in the comments below. Okay, and then I got this comment from Kaperowitz, pointing me to an April 2000 General Conference talk by President Hinckley, where he talks about this prophecy of Brigham Young. And also another one from Elder James E. Talmage. So let's hop over to that. The name of the talk is To All the World in Testimony. I first want to read this paragraph because I feel like this is key. Now, in this historic session, when we mark the birth of a new century and the beginning of a new millennium, we have built this new and wonderful conference center. You may remember, if you've been watching my channel for a while, that for a while there, I was really focusing on the year 2000 because we kept coming across major things in church history, major milestones that took place in or around that year. I have this spreadsheet called Timeline 2000 AD, and it has all these things. You can pause and read them if you'd like. But one of those major things was the opening. They first used the conference center in the April General Conference, but then it was dedicated in the October General Conference of that year. But that was one of the big things. And so the thing to maybe think about when it comes to the conference center is you could view it as potentially a symbol of the millennium. Even though the official second coming hasn't happened yet, and who knows how long it's going to be used for, how long church headquarters is going to be in Salt Lake, but you could potentially see the conference center, along with all these other things that took place in that year, as a symbol of the millennium. So with that in mind, let's skip down to this part. Ground was broken July 24th, 1997, the 150th anniversary of the arrival of the first pioneers in this valley. That was an historic event. Now look at this. We did not know it at the time, but in 1853, Brigham Young, in speaking of temples, said, quote, "The time will come when we shall build on the top groves and fish ponds." So they didn't even know that. Remember, the conference center, it has a rooftop garden. And is this what Brigham Young was seeing? Well, let's continue. In 1924, Elder James E. Talmage of the Council of the 12 Apostles wrote, and actually for this, we're going to go directly to the source because I wanted this for my spreadsheets. And typically when you come across these interesting quotes, if you go to the primary source and you read before and after the quote, you find other interesting things. It almost happens every single time, and it happened this time. Okay, so we're looking at his journal entry for August 29th, and this is the year 1924. Our son Carl is 26 years old today. It is now 47. And by the way, whenever I think of the number 47, I think of 1847, the days of 47. It is now 47 years since President Brigham Young died. What? I went to verify that just to make sure I was reading that right. And yeah, he passed away August 29th of 1877. There's 2 sevens right there. So on the 47th anniversary of the passing of President Brigham Young, Elder James E. Talmage records his vision. I'm still not sure if it was a vision or if it's a prophecy. It was certainly prophetic, but he recorded this in his journal on that day. So fascinating. Okay. Early this morning, I was one of President Grant's party who visited the fairgrounds to witness a demonstration of amplifiers and broadcasting apparatus that were set up by the Bell Telephone Company. We found the apparatus very efficient, and its operation suggests the feasibility of an installation on the tabernacle grounds. Now here's the part right here that President Hinckley includes in his talk. I have long seen the possible erection of a great pavilion on the north side of the tabernacle. That's where the conference center is. Seating perhaps 20,000 people, or even double that number, with amplifiers capable of making all hear the address given from the tabernacle stands. And in addition to this, a connection with the broadcasting system with receivers in the several chapels of other meeting houses throughout the Intermountain region. Okay, so he was pretty close with some of that. The conference center seats 21,000. And I don't think that that's by mistake. 21 is a multiple of 7. It seats 21,000, and there is broadcasting that's done from the conference center. And if you go to the other buildings on Temple Square, like the Tabernacle, the old Tabernacle, and the Assembly Hall, they have an overflow where you can go in there, and then there's screens where you can watch conference from. So it definitely seems prophetic. Let's go back to President Hinckley's talk. He says, in 1940, the First Presidency and the 12 had their architect draw up a plan of a building that would seat 19,000 and would stand where this building stands. That was 60 years ago. They thought about it, they talked about it, but finally they dropped the idea entirely. These statements and actions were wonderfully prophetic. We knew nothing about them. All of them have come to our attention since we began this construction. That is so amazing. We have not built a temple with trees and fish ponds on the roof, but on this edifice, we have many trees and running water. Brigham Young may have foreseen this structure very near the temple. So that made me think about this scripture in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 12. For now we see through a glass, darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know, even as also I am known. There's a quote that I found that goes along with that. This is President John Taylor. At the time, he was president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, but later became president of the church. And he says, and hence, those who have obeyed the gospel, although in many instances they do not comprehend it in all its bearing, and very few do, In fact, we only see as through a glass darkly. We see in part, know in part, prophesy in part, and comprehend in part, until that which is perfect shall come, and that which is in part shall be done away, that we may all then see as we are seen, and know as we are known. Now, I'm not in a position to judge Brigham Young or exactly what's going on here. We may actually see the day where there are temples that have fish ponds and actual groves. But maybe what he was seeing was the conference center and some of these temples that we were just talking about that have atriums and things like that. He may have been looking through a glass darkly, and this is how he described it. Maybe he filled in some of what he thought what he was seeing, but we'll just have to see. But that is so interesting, especially if he saw specifically the conference center, which you could say is a symbol of the millennium, the new millennium. All right, continuing. We have what Brother Talmage thought of, and much, much more. These services will not only be heard by all who are seated in the conference center, they'll be carried by radio, television, and cable, and they will be transmitted by satellite to Europe, to Mexico, to South America. And of course, now we have YouTube, and the internet is much more accessible to people. We reach far beyond the Intermountain area of which Brother Talmage spoke. We reach beyond the confines of the United States and Canada. We essentially reach across the world. And again, if Elder Talmage had a vision, maybe he was also looking through a glass darkly. All right, continuing. This is truly a magnificent building. I know of no other comparable structure built primarily as a hall of worship that is so large and that will seat so many. It is beautiful in its design, in its appointments, and in its wonderful utility. It is built of reinforced concrete to the highest seismic codes required in this area. The concrete is faced with granite taken from the same quarry as was the stone for the temple. Both buildings even quarried the blemishes of that granite. Now, I'm kind of surprised, but I just realized that I didn't have an entry for the conference center on my spreadsheet called Quotes A through Z, so this is new. It's currently row 105. And I want to point out, I'm not going to read these quotes, but I want to point out that the Salt Lake Temple, the conference center, as well as the church administration building, which is where you have the offices for the First Presidency, Quorum of the 12, and some of the 70, all three of those very, very important buildings are all made of the same granite. So I think that that's really interesting. It ties them all together. In one of these quotes here, President Hinckley was talking about another prophecy of Brigham Young, where he said that the emperors and kings of the world would come to Salt Lake City and visit the saints here, and how that was fulfilled with the 2002 Winter Olympics, in which many people came to Salt Lake, and then they visited all the church sites. They went to the Joe Smith Memorial Building, they went to Temple Square, but they also went to the conference center. And so you have two things with Brigham Young and Salt Lake City, and potentially the conference center. Here's my spreadsheet called Quotes, Prophecy, Modern Day. These are prophecies that are not in the scriptures. They've been issued after the scriptures. And so I already had that one from Brigham Young on here in 1853. But I went ahead and I added this one by Elder James E. Talmage. I'm putting it down as a possible prophecy because it's unclear whether he was just like thinking about it, but given the fact that he was an apostle and the Spirit is working through them, it very well could have been prophecy, maybe not through a vision, but maybe the Spirit just acting upon him and getting his mind prepared for this idea. But I went ahead and I put it on here. All right, but that's going to be all for this one. So if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also, make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.